But thank you, Chairwoman, for convening this hearing. We as a committee have spent significant time addressing the brazen and broad scope of power held by law enforcement agencies, from the FBI to various prosecutorial entities under the Department of Justice. And time again, we are met with concrete examples of unfettered law enforcement practices that not only undermine our fundamental civil liberties, but our basic principles of human dignity and security. When the ACLU conducted a study with members of Congress and a mugshot database, 28 members of Congress were falsely matched, including the late Congressman John Lewis. And this was members of Congress, public officials. Imagine what it's like for everyday people across this country. And what we do know of this technology is that the darker your skin tone, like mine, the more likely you will be falsely identified. During the Ferguson uprising, following the murder of Michael Brown Jr., I recall wearing bandanas as a response to the tear gas. It was during that time, though, that we realized that we needed to wear bandanas because of the likelihood of facial recognition technology being used against protest movements and surveilling each and every one of us involved in the Ferguson uprising. Director Goodwin, the GAO found that 14 agencies reportedly use facial recognition technology to support criminal investigations. Yes or no, was FRT used by the federal law enforcement agencies during the protests following the torture and murder of George Floyd? It's just a yes or no.
Yes.
And what are the collateral consequences of protesters being identified by these technologies?
So, Congresswoman, we didn't go into that issue. We raised the concerns about privacy and accuracy. So, of course, with accuracy, the concern is that people would be misidentified by the technology, and that could have adverse consequences. The privacy issue is that their faces, a person's face could be out there and could be used, in a number of ways. So our focus was to look at the lay of the land for how law enforcement were using the technology.
Thank you. In 2016, it was reported that police used facial recognition to surveil crowds during the Freddie Gray protests to find people with outstanding warrants. Mr. Lee, are there any protections for protesters' identities when they are in public spaces but engaging in First Amendment protected activity?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. And this would be, in our mind, a clear violation of the First Amendment, but also there are serious privacy and civil liberties concerns with the kind of use of facial recognition technology that we saw not only with the George Floyd protests, but also that we saw with LAPD using Ring cameras to surveil Black Lives Matter protesters. We have serious concerns in this, and there are serious civil rights and civil liberties concerns about the tracking of protesters, especially in these circumstances, and especially when the technology is not well used or very accurate.
So, Mr. Lee, how does the use of the facial recognition technology used to identify protesters, how does that influence the public perception or opinion of law enforcement or even the high-tech policing?
There is already a tenuous relationship between communities that are over-surveilled and over-policed and law enforcement. We've seen this time and time again over the past year. And that's something that I think Congress needs to keep in mind when looking about regulating facial recognition technology. And these are tools used by law enforcement to disproportionately target Black and Brown people across the nation. And we need to keep that in mind, and the civil rights and the civil liberties of those people in mind as we think about what the next steps are. That's why we, as a civil rights community, have asked for a ban or a moratorium and a tactical pause, to use the language of Ms. Frederick. We think that it chills protest, it chills speech, it misidentifies, and it does not work.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lee. There are local solutions that are being